Welcome to this Tutor to You Sociology topic video looking at stratification, focusing on defining social class, looking at the work of Savage et al. And the Great British Class Survey. In the early part of the 21st century, there was a re-emergence of interest in social class structures in the UK, and Savage et al. Argued that a different form of analysis was required of traditional social class definitions. Traditional definitions were focused on occupations, such as the National Statistics Socio-Economic Classification, which was developed in the 1970s. But Savage et al. Argued that the definitions of class in the 21st century needed to incorporate the different forms of capital outlined by Pierre Bourdieu in 1984's distinction. Using a form of latent class analysis, a method of measuring categorized behaviours linked to social class groups, Savage et al. Analysed the results of the 2011 Great British Class Survey, which was designed to incorporate elements of economic, cultural and social capital to differentiate between different social backgrounds. These included measures of social networks, of how leisure time was spent, musical taste in cuisine and economic factors such as house price and savings. Backed by a national campaign of advertising on different BBC forums, the Great British Class Survey collected 161,000 results in the 6 months that it was live. However, further research was required as the results were dominated by well-educated social groups, which created a sample bias in the results. A further face-to-face survey of just over 1,000 respondents was conducted, with the sample constructed using A further face-to-face sample of 1,062 respondents was conducted, and the percentages of the different class structures are those that are represented in this video. Upon analysis of results, Savage et al. Concluded that alongside the traditional working class and traditional middle class, there were 5 other categories of social class within the UK. These were the precariat, who measured 15%, the traditional working class at 19%, emergent service workers at 15%, new affluent workers at 14%, a new technical middle class at 6%, the established middle class with 25% of respondents, and the elite at just 6% of respondents. This differed greatly from the Great British Class Survey conducted by the BBC, where over 22% of respondents described themselves as being elite. However, in Savage et al.'s research, they found only 6% of the population classified as being elite. These were the ones with the highest levels of social, economic and cultural capital in the face-to-face responses. The typical occupations in these groups included high-level managers and executives, doctors and lawyers who were working at a high level within their own field. The next group was the established middle class, with 1 in 4 people in the face-to-face survey identifying as being from the established middle class. These individuals had high economic capital, high status social contacts and high levels of highbrow and emerging cultural capital. Within this group included occupations such as engineers, white-collar civil servants, high-ranking police officers and doctors. The next group was the technical middle class, with just 6% of respondents identifying as being from this group. These had high levels of economic and social contacts, but lower levels of cultural capital. This group was dominated by occupations in the scientific fields, such as pharmacists, radiographers, natural and social science professionals, and educational leaders. The new affluent workers is a term that many sociologists will have encountered through looking at the work of Townsend and Devine. These accounted for 14% of face-to-face respondents, and they had a moderately high level of economic capital, a high number of social contacts, but lower status social contacts. They also had moderate highbrow cultural capital, but they were high in emerging cultural capital. That is, cultural tastes, attributes and likes that are associated with more contemporary society. Within this group, there were occupations that included electricians, plumbers, sales and retail assistants. Emergent service workers accounted for 15% of those respondents. They had lower economic capital in their savings and their home ownership, but they had a reasonable household income. They had high emerging cultural capital, being aware of cultural changes in society, but low highbrow capital, that is, cultural. They also had moderate social capital, having a small number of contacts and those of being a lower value. Typical occupations in this group included workers in catering and hospitality and in customer service. The traditional working class were represented by 19% of respondents, and these were seen as having low economic capital but more likely to be homeowners. They also had low levels of social contacts, and whilst these may be more widespread, were of a lower value. They also had low cultural capital, both highbrow and emerging. Most typical occupations that fell into the traditional working class category included secretaries, van drivers and care workers. The final group that were identified were the precariat, at 15% of respondents in the face-to-face survey. This group achieved the lowest scores on economic, social and cultural capital, and were most likely to be found in occupations including retail and cleaning staff. This group also included those who were long-term unemployed, and were perceived to have the worst life chances of those groups on the survey. In evaluating the work of Savage et al., it's important to note that when they were linked to the British class survey, it produced a sample bias. Out of the initial 161,000 respondents, a further survey of over 1,000 had to be conducted, as most individuals identified with the upper social classes. A further evaluation is that the subjective elements that were based upon self-report studies, individuals defining what their economic, social and cultural capital were, meant that individuals could easily be placed into a different social class group than other people may have perceived them to be in. However, Savage et al.'s work can be seen as a more holistic interpretation of social class, seeing class as more than an economic position or occupation, and taking into account elements of social and cultural capital, as well as what an individual earns or where they work. That concludes this Tutor to You sociology topic video on stratification, looking at defining social class with Savage et al. And the Great British Class Survey. Thanks for watching.